The Nimlioh avocado variety. This is an old variety, one of the Wilson Popinoe varieties, over 100 years old. These are all Nimliohs here, these three. And you can see, it's a hefty one. They turn black when ripe. On the tree, they have a nice speckled appearance when they're just maturing, kind of a green to black with yellow-green speckles. It's an attractive fruit hanging on the tree. They're heavy and they'll weigh the branches down. And just for comparison, we've got some other varieties here. Here's your standard Hass. This is about an average size Hass. You can see that the Nimliohs are a lot bigger. This is a Nimo, also a big fruit, not quite as big as Nimlioh though. And an itty bitty Mexicola. There's a little wimpy baby fruit there. Nimo and Nimlioh share some history. They were both discovered down in Guatemala in 1916, 1917 by Wilson Popinoe. Who was Wilson Popinoe? Well, at the time he was an agricultural explorer for the USDA, but he also has a lot of other very interesting avocado history. I'll get to that in a second. Why don't we talk about the fruit for a minute first? Nimliohs have, they're one of those avocados with a thick woody shell. I mean, you'd expect it to sound like wood when you knock on it. A really fat stem too, so you always want to pop the stem out, give a little test with a toothpick, just to make sure it's ready to go. It's ready to go. Okay, so let's cut this guy open. You'll probably hear the woodiness, grittiness in the shell as I cut it open. There we go. Not bad looking, right? Sometimes there's a little bit of like purplish, reddish fiber showing near the stem end, but in general it's a fiberless flesh in there. Very nice texture, and you can also see sometimes some grit along the peel. Because it's such a thick woody peel, you get some grit. That's what those little lines are, from little pieces of grit. Also, the seed on a Nimlioh, you know, it's a moderately sized seed for the proportional to the flesh, but it's still a big seed itself. And sometimes the seed coat does not adhere to the seed, which is a bit annoying. It's not a big problem, but that is pretty common on this variety. Let's take a bite. It tastes like an avocado from Guatemala, frankly. I have no idea how to describe that flavor, but there's a flavor of avocados from Guatemala similar to Nibal, the flavor Nibal, and Nimlioh has it. Maybe it's a bit of a walnut taste, I don't know. But Nimlioh itself has a nice flavor, but it's not as rich as Nibal. Nibal has a more like robust smokiness to it. it's just better than Nimlioh. But Nimlioh is a good flavored avocado, and my family's been eating some lately, and they all like it, but they all say it's not my favorite. You know, it's good. It's not my favorite though. I I do think it sometimes tastes a bit like butter as well. Uh, Not the texture, but the actual flavor of butter, where it has flavor, but it's mild. Anyway, uh, good eating avocado. Nothing to complain about. And it's really well suited to making into its own bowl of guacamole. Like Nibal, like Reed, but honestly, Nimlioh is even better. Here's what the shell looks like after you've eaten one in its entirety. I mean, you know, it looks like a wood bowl, right? It's just perfectly suited to adding some salsa, whatever, lime juice, onion, tomato, peppers, mix it up, take some chips out, and you're not going to poke your chips through the skin. It's, listen to that. Yeah, very well suited for that. So it's October right now, and the season of Nimlioh is generally summer. But if you have a big tree and if you live in a mild climate, they'll definitely hold into the fall here, and maybe even into the winter for you. Now, what happened to Nimlioh? Why is it not something you see around? I think one thing that happened to it was just found to be too big. A lot of the early growers from the 1920s into the 1930s, they just said, you know, Nimlioh's it's too big for the market. Another thing is it doesn't have quite the flavor as Nibal. Nibal appeared at the same time, and the tree of Nibal also produces a bit better than Nimlioh. And so Nibal, you've got a slightly smaller fruit, you've got slightly better flavor, you've got a slightly better tree in terms of productivity. So Nimlioh just didn't win out in the commercial game. But it's a good variety for a backyard. I don't think anyone would complain about the tree in their backyard. Especially if you like big avocados. I mean, I would say it's one of the best eating big avocados. I put it above like a Queen or a Daily 11, although it's not as big as those avocados. So if you're just going for size, Queen and Daily 11. But if you want like big fruit and quality, can't think of anything that beats Nimlioh, at least that's widely, well, not widely available, but somewhat available. Another thing that that happened during the commercial entry, during the entry of Nimlioh into the commercial industry back in the 1910s and 20s, is that Fuerte had just been introduced. Fuerte was introduced in 1911, so 5 or 6 years later, Nimlioh, Nibal were introduced, and Fuerte pretty quickly became the dominant, most desirable variety. Sorry, I don't have a Fuerte here, but Fuerte is just going to be a little bit bigger than a Hass, and so the size is better on a Fuerte, and the Fuerte flavor is a bit better than Nimlioh, and so you have some advantages there. But the relationship between Fuerte and Nibal and Nimlioh is that Wilson Popenoe, he went down to Guatemala, rode over 3,000 miles on horseback, found these avocados and 21 others that he introduced. Nimlioh was number 17, Nibal was number 15. But then his father, Fred Popenoe, was the owner of the West India Gardens Nursery in Altadena, who sent Carl Schmitt down to Mexico in 1911, Carl Schmitt found the Fuerte in Atlisco, and it was Fred Popenoe, Wilson's father, who introduced that variety. It was Wilson Popenoe himself who grafted up the Fuerte trees there in Altadena back in 1912, 13, and so there's quite a family legacy there with Popenoe, the Popenoes, and these varieties, Nibal, Nimlioh, lots of others, Cabnal, Mayapan, Bennick, so many. They're all known as the Wilson Popenoe varieties, and they all have names that come from the Quechua language down there in Guatemala and the surrounding area. So fun historical variety, and a pretty good fruit too.